episode 49 of the Hockey Hub. My pleasure to be joined by Andy Brickley, our first one together from sunny California. Might I add, bright and early. I'll get to that in a second. Brick, how you doing?
I'm doing great. It's a beautiful sunny day, and our location here in California, I guess, is the silver lining of the road trip, given the way things have gone for Boston. So, yeah, the sun came up. It's another day. We'll try to enjoy it.
Yeah, absolutely. I am obviously just playing here and just joking, but you do a lot of great things. And one of them is no matter what time we land, what time we check into the hotel, which sometimes is a good 3 a.m., depending where we're going, what city we're flying from, you still get up at what, 6, 7, do your crossword, have your morning routine, whereas I'm beauty sleeping or whatever I'm trying to do. Tell us about your morning routine and how you kind of get yourself set up for the day.
Yeah, I'm not sure where to answer that, where to begin to answer that. So if I would say I always had conviction, no matter what I did the night before, my body clock just got me up early, whether it's 5:30, 6 o'clock in the morning. That time of day, it's not commuter traffic yet. I can get my coffee. I can get my multiple newspapers. I'm an old soul when it comes to that. I don't really like doing anything on my phone. I like to have a newspaper in my hand. I like to do several puzzles. I'm a big fan of crosswords. I find it good mental stimulation to start my day, get my brain working. It's just the way my body works, and I like it. It's peaceful. It's calm. It's serene. The world's not going 100 miles an hour at that point. So I enjoy my mornings, and this is one of them. We're on the road. It was an early game last night, relatively speaking, an hour earlier than usual puck drop. So we had a little bit more time for that beauty sleep that's certainly paying off for you. But I like my mornings, and I don't know when it started or how it started. It's just the way it is.
You know what? You're really selling it. And the rare occasion that I do get up early, I'm such a night owl. And I think it's the schedule really that, I mean, again, you're on the same schedule. I don't know how you do it, but the schedule for me, the late night games, I'm definitely sleeping in. But on the rare occasion I get up before the world does, you're right. It's peace. It's the nicest thing. But me, last night, all I had to drink was milk and water, and I'm still tired this morning. So that goes to show her my genes and my.
Yeah, well, you know what? You're dealing with the time zone too. I mean, that's another consideration, right? I mean, Boston time zone is 3 hours earlier, so that's also a factor. And one thing I've learned through the years, as we gain more and more information about what's best for our bodies, certainly for the athletes, the hockey players. The one thing that I do try to do, and it's hard for me to do, is drink a lot of water when you're traveling from time zone to time zone, because your body gets dehydrated. And that can affect your sleep pattern, how you feel. So I understand what you're talking about, but I don't know. My body's more, it just handles whatever comes at me. And I think I'm lucky to have that kind of DNA. I got to thank my parents for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, listen, we can just say it. You're way tougher than me, and I'm a big baby when it comes to sleep, and I'll just admit it straight up. But either way, you're right. After this pod, we got the day going, and the day started, and we can, do our own thing. But what we're doing here on this show, I always forget to set up what we have going on. We have Natalie and Casey a little later on in the show as guests to wrap things up for us. But we're going to be talking about the Bruins road trip so far, and I wish... which is 0-5-1 their last 6 and 0-3 on this road trip. And I wish we had better news and better things to talk about, but unfortunately not a great start to the road trip. And, we're just going to kind of try to break down what's been going right, because there are some things that have been going right, but what's been going wrong too. So your assessment so far, like as a player, Brick, I kind of want to take you back to your playing days, because that's really, you have, the best insight there about that. But given the Bruins season, given this road trip, given the chance and where they were in the standings ahead of it, what were the vibes when you were a player now, and what do you think they are, and how do you combat that? Because you can't, let these losses sit with you. You've got to still play out the rest of the season and still play for your chance. But what are the vibes like, and how do you fix that?
Well, before I use my playing experience to answer that question, so I will say coming into this road trip, the realistic approach was Vegas was going to be a really hard game. They're a better team. LA was going to be a really hard game. They're a better team than you. So I thought you could probably win San Jose. You probably have a good chance to beat Anaheim, and then maybe 50-50 with Detroit. So I was looking at maybe 5 or 6 points would be satisfactory, given the current state of the Boston Bruins. So we're not there. We're not there. Obviously, the way things ended in San Jose, that game plan or that expectation went south. But to think back to my playing days, before I became a Bruin, before I was on a New Jersey team that made the playoffs for the first time in the history of that franchise, I played for non-playoff teams that were not very good, that were short on talent, that didn't have a cohesive locker room because everybody seemed to be just playing for themselves and playing survival to stay in the National Hockey. And that's never a good situation. And that's the vibe I get right now, given the current state of the Boston. I don't want to be negative. I don't want to sound, ring a panic bell or anything like that. I don't think it's that severe. But I know I played on a Pittsburgh the year before they drafted Mario first overall. You had to finish dead last to get the first pick overall, and we finished dead last. I think we won 17, 18 games the entire season. So I've been in these locker rooms. I've been in the skates of these players right now, and I know how challenging it is and frustrating, and the emotions can get the better of you, and they're not good emotions. It's hard to keep it together. It's hard to play for one another. It's hard to believe that you can win a game when you lace your skates up when you play against the better teams in the National Hockey League. It's really hard. It's demanding. And if you don't have flawless leadership to keep it together, not only in the room, but behind the bench, at the top of the pyramid, it's really, really difficult. And it's hard to win hockey games. And it's hard to sustain. You can have good stretches within a game itself because you are good enough players to compete. But when it starts to go the other direction, it's hard to stem it. It's hard to turn it around. It's hard to stay into the game because you're just not good enough. And that's the vibe I get right now for what we're watching. It's hard to watch because we've been so spoiled as Bruins fans to watch this organization and the great leadership and the culture that was in that room. Chara to Bergeron and pass that torch down through to Marchand. You move a lot of veteran quality people out of your locker room. It's going to be a dearth of leadership, and it's hard. It's hard to play for one another and keep it together. You can try and you can have a narrative and talk about it, but I'm telling you, I lived it. I experienced it, and it was a different world back then. But the emotions are still the same, and it's hard to. It's really difficult to keep it together and be a cohesive group and play for what's the most important. It's hard to do so.
Yeah, no, I think those obviously an excellent read. That's why we asked you. But the playing for themselves part, you do feel it a little, and like you said, maybe you see cohesiveness within games, but ultimately it's not there throughout the full 60. And I don't know if I've mentioned this on the show before, but I know we've had our chats about it. When I came from Toronto 5 years ago to the Boston Bruins, I didn't cover the Toronto Maple Leafs in the same extent. Like I wasn't the team reporter. I was just a sports news reporter that would come in and out. But I spent a lot of time in the locker room, and that was really my biggest experience with one consistent team. Like I was covering the visiting room a lot, but you're not with them all the time. But I just remember feeling, and obviously Toronto playing well, doing well now, but it's taken them a really long time to get there. And they hired Brandon Shanahan, I don't know how many years ago, but he was in charge of changing the culture. And that was like such a big narrative, such a big theme. The Phil Kessel and Dion Phaneuf era was awful. Like, I don't want to use the word awful, but it was bad vibes. So just to use a trendy word, bad vibes. And I didn't quite, I knew that this seemed off and the team wasn't making the playoffs for long stretches. but I didn't know how good it could be because this is just, the only team I ever covered. And I just thought this is what a hockey locker room's like. And then I came to the Boston Bruins and Zdeno Chara was still there. And I was just blown away. And I will say this to my dying day. They're just blown away at the difference between the energy and the culture in the dressing room, outside of it, how players were to staff. And I'm not, by the way, calling, the Toronto Maple Leafs out at all for being rude or bad people. It was just vibes. And kind of like you said, this playing for yourself mentality. And it was just palatable, the difference. And I was like, oh, this is unique. This is different. And, you hear cliches being tossed around a lot in sports because, narratives sometimes get blown out of proportion. And the Bruins one just wasn't. The culture in the room just wasn't an exaggeration. And so that's something that I know is very important to management because I know that they know and understand that even though it's not X's and O's or tangible, it can be an absolute game changer and a huge difference maker. So like you said, a couple retirements and then you're shipping out some guys who are a big part of that leadership group. It can slip quick. And I know that that's going to be a big focus for management going forward. But that being said, thinking about the wins and the losses are obviously tougher in the room to navigate. But something Joe Sacco said yesterday before puck drop was that what's really important, and I don't know if he's got to be the guy, if Puss has got to be the guy, McAvoy's not in the room right now, is remembering the habits and the I don't know if it's routine, I don't know if it's attitude, I don't know if it's what it is, team chemistry, but within a loss, the habits that were built with the previous kind of era and remembering how to handle that and move forward is very important. So when you don't have a clear leader in the room, is that something, Joe Sacco has to take that responsibility or who does that? Who kind of teaches these how to rebound from a loss habits to these newer and younger players?
Yeah, unfortunately, that is more responsibility on Joe Sacco. First of all, he has the interim tag attached to his head coaching title. And that's never a totally comfortable situation for a guy that feels like he's head coach worthy. And then you're dealing with the roster construct and the fact that you don't have your best two defensemen in the lineup. You don't have a true leader. You're not getting the offense. All the things that are plaguing the Bruins right now is a problem for Joe Sacco. And then you have to worry about the cliques or the factions within the locker room that come into play when you have a losing culture. We talk about playing for yourself, but then you're also looking for allies, and that's how those cliques start. And you can't have that. And even when you know that as a player, it still happens when you can't find a way to win a hockey game. And that's what the Bruins are experiencing right now. And just to reiterate, so I'm not in the room. This is from a distance. This is from where I observe, and that's why we use the word vibe. That's the vibe. But you don't know for sure unless you're in there and watch the interaction from player to player. I can only base it on my experience when I was in these situations. They're correctable, they're fixable, and when you fix them, the rewards are tremendous. But right now, they have to find that path that puts them in that direction.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of Joe Sacco, you always have a great conversation with him post-game. So why don't we run that for the viewers right now? This is after the loss to LA. Andy Brickley 101 with Joe Sacco.
Joe, there were a number of points during this hockey game where we were talking about some of the positives that we were enjoying watching this Bruins team play. Early goal in the first period, great start to the game. You weren't chasing the score. Early in the second period, you tied the game with another goal. When things got a little nasty, the physicality and the care and the want was all on display. But then it seemed like the Kings were just too much. What were the positives you saw of the silver linings tonight?
Well, I think you touched on a few of them. The start, the competitiveness in the first and second period. Those are things that as a group, when you're going through a tough time, you want to see. There's obviously been an opportunity here for some young players that are coming into the league right now for the first time or getting more of an opportunity than they had before, and some other guys as well. It's really, obviously it's frustrating for us right now as a group because, we're not getting any results. But you just have to stick with it. This is not an easy league, and teams are not forgiving. So, but I did like the fact that we just have too many breakdowns. I think, playing 3 and 4, you really have to be sharp upstairs, and you can't make plays like mental mistakes that are going to cost you, game management mistakes, and sometimes that creeps in, but certainly, it's frustrating at times.
And very quickly, with all that in mind and thinking about moving forward and putting games behind you, I got to assume at some point in your lengthy career, both as a player and a coach, you experienced this before, either part of it as a player or coaching somewhere. What's the challenge for you to make sure these guys still come to the rink ready to work, compete, and understand that these games have meaning?
Right, and they do. I think that, been on both sides of the coin, and obviously, when you're going through a stretch like this, there's a couple of things that you have to keep in mind. Number one, obviously, is the pride for yourself, the pride for your teammates and the organization. That's something certainly that is first and foremost. And obviously, it's a privilege to play in this league, and you can't take it for granted any night. And that's something that every guy has to remember that. And certainly, we're going to keep fighting, and hopefully, we'll work our way out of this soon.
Thanks, Joe.
Okay.
Well, great interview by you, and you kind of just setting up the interview. You summarized those thoughts and echoed that, and when I asked you about that extra responsibility. So, anything you want to add to that? Because I definitely want to get to some big storylines with Jeremy Swayman and the fight that didn't happen. We can even talk about, even though it was a couple games ago, that offside non-challenge. But anything you want to add to what he had to say before we move on, Brick?
Yeah, the two words that jump out, based on the second question in our conversation, privilege. I mean, those are the words that comes from a guy that understands leadership. He understands the challenge that players are facing, and those are the points of emphasis that need to be hammered home to the players when you're in this situation. The pride as a player, the pride of the organization, and the privilege to play in the league. I couldn't agree more. You just try to hammer home that message and make sure that that's first and foremost in their mind every time they pick up their skates and they're going out to play an NHL game.
Agreed. Okay, well, before we move on to the next topic, I've got to pay some bills. So just reminding fans that Red Sox around the corner, and you can actually stream the entire Red Sox season with an SN360 annual plan. It is actually available at an all-new reduced price of just $20 a month. That's paid annually. For a limited time, you can also get 4 free tickets to Fenway with your purchase. So to watch this Red Sox team from anywhere, I use my NESN360 app all the time when I'm visiting family in Toronto to catch games. Visit NESN360.com to sign up today. But let's continue with the Bruins talk. So obviously on socials and around the room with media, one of the big asks was talking to Jeremy Swayman yesterday and about this fight that the league didn't let happen, or the refs didn't let happen, between him and Darcy Kuemper. Want to know your thoughts about, I don't know where to start here, but first of all, Jeremy's saying he's defending a player from being touched, pushed around by Darcy. What do you make of the whole thing?
First of all, I had no problem with it. Second of all, I wanted to see it. Third of all, I'm almost, ambivalent about the reason why Jeremy came to the center ice dot and was calling out Kuemper. Again, I having been in these situations, the frustrations and the emotions, you find at some point you finally get sick of what's happening. You get sick of what's going on with you individually. You get sick of the losing. You get sick of, everything that's bad about your sport and your game and your livelihood, your profession, that this might be a good solution for you. I mean, however he got to that point, I have no problem with. I wish they let them go. I'm sure everybody in the building and the TV audience wouldn't have mind, certainly 90% of it. When you think about the Four Nations, right, what's your first takeaway? It's not Connor McDavid's goal in overtime, right? What was it? It was the start of the Saturday night game in Montreal by Team USA and Team Canada. Am I correct on that? Do you agree?
Absolutely.
my first memory. The 3 fights right off the bat. Well, a goalie fight, between LA and Boston, and the Bruins are in a bad losing streak, and this is your top goalie who's fought all year to find his game, and the emotions finally come to, a summit. I'm interested in seeing that, and I wish they had let it take place. So those are my thoughts on the Jeremy Swayman situation, regardless of what his reasons for it were.
Listen, I think everyone in that building, and obviously, we keep a track of the conversation online, agrees with you. Everyone wanted to see it happen. I don't get to sit right at the glass, depending on the arena. I don't always get to sit right at the glass. So I was a little further behind in the Zamboni, and I have to kind of fight my way through. There's a lot of staff there, and I heard the crowd and immediately ran up to the glass because it was about to explode in there. But unfortunately, like you said, they didn't let it happen. Might be asking you an impossible question, and if you can't answer it, that's okay. But why? Like, why did they not let it happen? Is it just because they don't want fighting in the league as much? Is it like, what was, what do you think that reason was?
I don't have an explanation for you. So there are some things in this league, and I've been around it for a long, long time. There are some things that happen in this league that I just can't explain away, whether it's philosophy, whether it's marketing philosophy, whether it's rules, interpretation of rules, whatever it might be. Sometimes I'm on the wrong side of that argument or that philosophy or that opinion. And I don't know. I don't know why they wouldn't let it go. Maybe it's a mandate that comes down from the top. It says, if you can prevent it, prevent it. I don't know. I'm not privy to those conversations. I don't know what their game plan is. I just felt like there were 25,000 people sitting there, or however many people in that building last night, 15, 20, whatever it is, that would have liked to have seen it. And I think you've deprived them of it. And I don't think we're Neanderthal to think that. I thought it was a perfect time for it to just organically let it happen. And it's Lauko fights the other night, right? In San Jose, and the minute his shirt's over his head and he's at a disadvantage, okay, now you move in. I mean, what's so difficult about that? Let the goalies fight. If it starts to go the wrong way, then you move in. I mean, that's the general philosophy that's existed for decades.
Yes, exactly. You're right there. You can stop it if it goes the wrong way, as you said. And you talk about the Four Nations. What stands out? It's absolutely those first couple seconds in that Canada-US game. And even as a fan of the game growing up, like, I don't remember every fight I've ever seen, but I do remember all the goalie fights I watched. Like, I remember all of them. You can replay them in your head and highlight reel because they don't happen that often. And I think it's good for the game. And like you said, the refs are right there to step in if something goes awry. And, I wonder if that, depending on how it would have went, depending on the momentum one or the other team or both teams would have gotten from it. But obviously with Jeremy, challenging, wanting to have that happen, emotions kind of rise and then it gets stopped. That, deflates you a little bit. Like, I'd have to speak to him about that. But either way, as a fan of the game, I think, almost everyone's in agreement that we wanted to see that happen, but it didn't.
Yeah.
So
if I could digress for a second. So,
yeah,
and maybe I'm a product of my generation or how much I loved the game in the late 80s and early 90s. And there was a lot more, pugilism back then. It was a different game, and the game has gotten better. And I loved watching the game today, and I appreciate good hockey. I appreciate, Joe Sacco talked about you got to be mentally sharp. When things aren't going well and you play a lot of games in a short period of time, you have to be mentally sharp. You have to make the right decisions. You have to have game management. And I love that aspect of hockey. I love the subtleties, and I love the hockey IQ and the guys that play a smart game and teams that play a smart game. I appreciate all that, top of my list. But I also like a good physical game. I'm a Boston kid. I grew up with the Bruins, in the 70s. Love that style of hockey. I was drafted by the Flyers. They were the Broad Street Bullies. And even though I didn't play that kind of game, I understood the importance of that part of the game. When I think back to 2011, and we all appreciated that Stanley Cup team and the way it was built and the way they played. And one of the games that stands out most to me was one night they played Dallas at the Garden, and there were 3 fights within the first 10 seconds of the hockey game. And And then there was a fourth about a minute and a half later. And I remember Brad Marchand, and he was at the end of the Bruin bench while all these fights were taking place, closest to the Dallas bench. And Razor could tell you about it because he was the starting goalie for Dallas that night. And Marchand was yelling down to the Stars bench saying, really? Really? This is what you guys want to do? We haven't even gotten to Chara and Lucic yet, you know? And the Bruins were winning the fights. You know, I think Soupy Campbell lost the first one, and then Sean Thornton and Adam McQuaid and Andrew. I mean, it was just one after another. And I think Bruins fans love that, you know, and I'm a product of that. I love it too. So it's just more ammunition for me to say I would not have mind seeing Swayman and Kuemper at center ice, particularly the way the Bruins feel about themselves right now. I think I would have enjoyed that.
Yeah, I mean, listen, I monitor social media. Obviously, I'm on Instagram and Twitter and TikTok and all those things. And what I found watching after Four Nations was a couple of videos went viral of people just kind of like talking into their phones as they do, and you know, just talking and sharing stories. And there were some that went viral of non-hockey fans, people who never watched the game. And one woman I particularly remember, she was in her car. In like I think she worked construction, like in a construction outfit, and you know, just started by saying like, "Hey, I didn't know what this hockey thing was before, you know, Saturday," and she was referring to the Canada-US game, and she said, "But the NHL is putting something on. I think it's called Four Nations." Like she was very not well versed in the game or what was even going on. But she's like, I watched those fights and I'm a hockey fan now. And she's like, tell me, what do I need to know about hockey? Tell me about it because I'm buying tickets and I want to go to a live game. And there were several videos of these non-hockey fans that somehow heard about the Four Nations or it was on their TV, and then they saw that Canada-US game and they were like, wow, what is this sport? And if that's what the NHL wants to do, they've got to be aware of the entertainment factor as well, and not only just the entertainment, but you know what that can do in a game. So I agree. I think everyone would have wanted to see it, and I think it only kind of helps the league and helps the fans enjoy it a little more. But we weren't on the ice making those decisions, right?
Well, there were no penalties in the game really to speak of. Certainly no fights. You know, I mean,
Yeah.
Again, it's further reason to say, all right, let that go. Just let that go. You know, but
yeah.
What do we know? What do we know?
What do we know? No, exactly. All right, Brick, there's so much we can get to. Maybe we'll chat a little bit about David Pastrnak, who yesterday we were in the room, and you know, there are little just subtle cues. First of all, before I get into it, I don't like cliche topics. I don't like pushing a narrative just to push a narrative because there's nothing else to talk about. And so it might feel this way because one of the consistent things we always bring up, not just us, but in the media, is like, oh, this leadership group, Pasta, McAvoy, you know, who's next? It's real with Pasta. And I can definitely speak to this by having been away for most of the year and then coming back, you know, when you're away and things feel different and look different. I feel like in this tiny little sample size that I've had around this team, which has been, you know, less than a month, that I've noticed a really big difference with David Pastrnak. Not to say that he wasn't vocal or he didn't have this leadership within him all along. It's been growing. But yesterday and throughout this road trip, I feel like he has changed a little bit. And there's this, you know, life maturity. He's a father now. And, you know, other things that he's grown up, obviously, and Bergeron and Chara and Marchand and Nick Foligno to a certain extent, you know, are gone. So he's taken this responsibility, but he really has, like, it's not just a narrative that just because they're the longest tenured Bruins in the room that we're pushing. It's real. And unfortunately for him right now, just no points in the last couple. So with that and the frustration that you mentioned in the room, what are you expecting, you know, to see out of David on and off the ice with that narrative of the whole leadership, and obviously not having the guys he's been used to playing with for a lot of his career, both of them gone now and off the team?
I would agree with the growth we've seen in David Pastrnak as a leader, and it's been reflected in his game in terms of how productive he's been over the second half of the year, and uh, the elimination of the high risk, bad turnover, hope plays, bad turnovers in the bad part of the ice, thinking he can do something that's almost impossible to do. There's so little of that in his game right now, which speaks to his desire to be a leader, knowing what's going on in the changing of the guard. And I have tremendous appreciation and admiration for that. I love the fact that he has a chance to be a 100-point guy. And that leads me to the next part of my response. When you get to this point and you start to play for yourself, and I don't mean that in a negative fashion, you have certain goals, and you have a dearth of leadership now, given the situation, what's going on with guys leaving and the trades that were made and the new guys and the youth and inexperience. So there's more on David's plate, more on his shoulders, and he's trying to absorb that. But he also has personal goals. I can assure you, he'd love to get to 100 points. And what best way to get there is you have to have players around you. It's a team game. No matter how good you are as an individual, you still need the other four guys on the ice out there to help you. And you have to convince the players that you're playing with. Like we saw him play with Middlestat last night. You knew that was coming. They got to find out who best fits with Casey Middlestat going forward. And it's hard to evaluate at the end of the year when you feel like the season's over and you're not going to make the playoffs, just playing out the string. It's hard to evaluate because are you getting a true assessment of what a player's like and where are they at mentally, emotionally, physically, and that's what we're experiencing as well. But I think David he wants that leadership tag. He wants to be part of the group moving forward. But I won't say it takes a village in hockey, but it takes more than one. It takes more than a captain. You have to have multiple guys in that room that assume the leadership roles and they lead the right way. And I think that search is on right now. And call it a narrative, call it what you will. If people want to discuss it, the reality is that's where this team's at. You have veteran guys, good guys that play significant minutes out of the lineup. That's part of your leadership group. They have to be. When you play as much as McAvoy plays, you play as much as Lindholm on the back end, Hampus plays, you're part of that leadership group, whether you like it or not. And David doesn't have very much of that with him right now. So you're kind of in that in-between space where you're trying to manage the rest of the season. You're trying to keep the message that we're still in it. We still have things to play for. I use that word. These games have to have meaning. When I talk to Joe Sacco, they have meaning to the individual player, but they have to have meaning as a team, and that's the job of the leadership. The problem is, who's the leaders, and are they leading in the right direction? And can you corral this group so that you stay cohesive as a team, as a group, and keep it together in long? It's going to be April 15th before you know it. So you got to dig in. Every time you put the skates on, if you're going to keep score, you might as well win. That's always been my philosophy, and I think it's always been good leadership philosophy that if we're going to go out and play, let's go out and win and play together.
That's exactly it. And actually, it leads perfectly to the next question about just the rest of this road trip. So we've played 3. Unfortunately, no wins there, but you have Anaheim on Wednesday and then Detroit on Saturday. You kind of talked about your thoughts heading into the trip, what games were more winnable than others. Now that you've seen, good things, maybe not throughout a full 60 minutes, but you've seen, Joe Sacco playing with lineups, Middlestat with Pasta, Fabian Lysell being introduced. What do you want to see in these next 2 games that will ultimately help lead to the wins?
The biggest thing I want to see is, the full 60. I want to see that forechecking game. I want to see, each guy have each player's back. I want to see the physical confrontation, not fights, just physical. There were stretches against LA where in the Bruins defensive zone, the commitment was there. They were doing, they were matching LA's defensive effort, in that first 15 minutes of the first period. I loved it. These guys care. They want to win. They're playing a good team. They don't like the way they didn't hang in there with Vegas. You put Vegas and LA in the same category as far as talented teams and good teams in the league. And I love that first 15 minutes. It's just that LA, their superiority, their depth, their balance, their talent, it just overwhelms you eventually because just the state that we're in, given what the Bruins are right now. So that's what I'm looking for: a full 60 committed effort. Play the game with an intelligence. Play to your strengths as a player. Try to enjoy the job that you have. It's so hard to find enjoyment right now with the Bruins team. Try to stick together. Make the right play. Don't hang your head. Don't give me bad body language. Uh, you know, if you have a bad shift, the next shift, pick your teammates up. That's. I think that's what we want to see from the remaining part of the schedule for the Boston Bruins. If we get that, then it's tolerable. It's more enjoyable because we all understand the situation that they're in, and we haven't seen it. We've been so spoiled for the better part of the last 2 decades that they were already in the playoffs at this point. They were playing meaningful games. We were enjoying the style of hockey that they play. I think we want that feeling. We want that feeling over the next, whatever it is, 5 weeks. If we can get that, I'll make it less, 3 weeks. If we can get that, then I think that would check the satisfaction box for me.
Yeah. Like you said, just the body language that stands out to me too, and how to just next shift, forget what happened or keep it consistent. The full 60 is something we haven't really been seeing. So nice to take those stretches that have been working. Like you said, the effort that they match at the beginning of the game through a full 60 and show some of the younger guys like a Fabian Lysell what it's like and the good habits to play in the NHL, which really quick, I feel like we've got a couple more minutes, Brick, just to give us your thoughts on Fabian Lysell and what you've seen through 2 games from him skill-wise.
Yeah, to try to accent the positive. I think he thinks the game pretty well offensively. When you only play 2 or 3 games in the NHL, the things that work for you in the American League don't work as often, not even close, in the National Hockey League. The American Hockey League is a great league. Some say it's the second best league in the world, but the jump from the AHL to the NHL is the gap is very, very big. And for individual players, it's bigger. And for some individual players, it's not as big. And when I see him, try to speed to the outside last night, and a good defenseman has a good stick, has a good gap, angles him to the boards, play over. Maybe that doesn't happen, in a game in Providence where he can get to that outside. Now he gets deep into the zone. He goes behind the net. He makes a play, or he gets himself a scoring chance. That's not going to happen as frequently. So I think he has the good hockey IQ offensively. I think he's got good puck skills. I know he's got a good shot. The other night in San Jose, he went around the net. There was chaos in front of the net, and it looked like the goaltender was coming off the near side post and tried to rip it up over the right shoulder, went off, and then up and over the net, over the glass. So you see those glimpses of the hockey offensive talent, how he sees the game and thinks the game. But as far as the stuff that makes you a dominant player or a good offensive player in the American League, in order for it to translate, it has to get better. In other words, he's got to get stronger, he's got to get quicker, he's got to get faster, he's got to think the game faster, he's got to get separation. He used that word with you, so when you interviewed him before the game against LA, he said, I want to use my speed, to give myself time and space to make a play. He's right, but it has to be exponentially better, quicker, faster. And when I see that, I think the offensive skills become a little bit more apparent. But show me 7, 8, 9, 10 games consecutively where he plays regular minutes. He gets 15, 16, 17 minutes, whatever it is. Keep rolling him out there. Try to find somebody that he meshes with nicely, that thinks the game the way he does, that has a skill set that allows him to use his skills even more prominently. And then I'd have a better read on the player. But I don't know him as an individual. He seems like he's an introvert at times. So I don't know what his personality is and what he's thinking while he's here. I can only evaluate him on what I see on the ice. I think there's something there. There's opportunity there. There's skill there. he needs to now, as an individual, process that, take that next step, or at least start moving in that direction to allow him to be a more effective player. And that's what I hope I see over the next X amount of games, 8, 9, 10, 11 games, whatever it is.
Yeah, I wish I could give you a deeper read on his personality, but obviously limited interaction on my end too. But I would agree with that. I will say there's a certain level of confidence that I've seen in him that I don't always see in young players coming up. And it's not cockiness. It is just a confidence that's, willing to talk to media, answering the question, doesn't feel afraid of answering any questions. His English is good. Maybe that helps too, because I know some non-English speaking players struggle with that at first. But I'm excited to get a better read on him and see how he, interacts with the team on a personal level. But Brick, go ahead.
If I could add one more thing, Soph, and not to beat a dead horse, but this again is that leadership quotient. So there's been a lot of good players, and you've talked to Casey Middlestat. When he was in Buffalo, so here's a kid, he was a stellar college player, put up huge numbers. He's a high pick, inside the top 10. He goes into Buffalo, and there's high expectations because of what he accomplished at the amateur level. And it doesn't really get to the level that everybody was hoping for, the player himself, the fans, the organization. And part of that reason was, and it's been this case in Buffalo for a long time, which is why they haven't made the playoffs, or it's certainly one variable. They don't have the necessary leadership, in the locker room and on the ice. And that's also a factor for a guy coming up in this situation. Fabian comes in here, it's not Bergeron, it's not Krejci, it's not Marchand, it's not Char. It's a different, and we use the word vibe. It's different. They're in transition. And that doesn't help a player like Lysell. There's nobody that he can lean on. He can lean on Pasta, but it's different. It's different. And I think that's a gap or a hole or a variable or whatever you want to call it that doesn't work in his favor. It doesn't help him have the comfort level, the peace of mind, the confidence that young players that are coming into these situations really, really, really require to help them make that step. It's not making excuses. It's just an observation. I wish it was a little different. I know when I was, trying to cut my teeth in the American League, when I stepped into the NHL, I got a 3-game taste. I played my first year in Maine, for the Philadelphia Flyers farm team, and they gave me a taste of the NHL in March. And I went into a room that had Darryl Sittler, Bobby Clark, Mark Howe. I mean, that's different, and they made me feel welcome. They made me feel like I belong. I was valued, and you're here for a reason. And it's easy to say that, but unless it's actually happening for a young player, it makes it that much more challenging for the young kid.
You know what? I love that insight about your experience. And I again, circling back to a point that we made, but, I guess worth emphasizing again is this has to be a focus this off season with management about making sure that doesn't slip. So whether you're, bringing people in as a supporting cast, David Pastrnak and Charlie McAvoy, or someone who's had a big leadership role already in the NHL, that has to be a focus, not just short term, but long term, because it could slip quickly, and everything you've built that's been so wonderful, you don't want to lose that. So, agreed there.
It's not an easy fix. Not an easy fix.
No.
So not an easy fix. Yeah.
Not an easy fix indeed. Rick, I don't know if you noticed, we're no longer just a television network. We're also a podcast network. So I'm paying some more bills. Reading one more promo before we toss to Casey and Natalie. But like I said, we're doing a lot of different podcasts. One of them is called Boston entered the chat. That is a different podcast, not just hockey, biggest trending news in the sports world. So covering all sorts of topics outside of Boston, but obviously focusing on the teams here as well. That's hosted by George Belechki, Travis Thomas, and Casey Hudson, and as usual, available wherever you get your podcast. Speaking of Casey Hudson, great addition to this team. She and Natalie, now we're going to send it over to them. They're going to go one-on-one talking about the Hockey East champion, Maine, and the NCAA hockey tournament. So let's send it over to them.
Casey Hudson here alongside Natalie Norrie to talk to you guys about some Hockey East, but more importantly, the exciting portion of Hockey East. It's Maine collecting their 6th program title with Ben Barr as the head coach leading the way. But Natalie, when they told me that we got to talk about this, you're the first person I thought of on the scene, behind the scenes. How was your weekend? How was it covering this exciting tournament?
Yeah, no, it was exciting just for many different reasons. It's the culmination of so much hard work and so many ups and downs throughout the season where, you think Maine being a top 5 through like the majority of the year, you're like, oh, they're going to take it all the way. But then BC looks like they're going to take it all the way. There was just so many like ups and downs throughout the year where it was unpredictable as to what the Garden would look like when it came to Hockey East championships. But you know what? We got a game that was so much fun for many reasons because it was the first time a Massachusetts school had not made the Hockey East Championship since 2002. And then when you think about that timeline, in kind of like a silly way, it actually was the first time there wasn't a red team in the final as well. So you had UConn, you had Maine, and just a whole bunch of like unexpecteds that happened. But it was so much fun to be there. And you really, I served as the in-arena host for the tournament, but of course was involved with the teams during the prep and all the research and all that kind of thing. But it was just so much fun to see it all come together and really kind of see something where any outcome would have been just a great story altogether. So yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Oh my gosh, I can imagine. And of course, the reporter and us, we love being able to get the stories. We love being able to track everything. Yeah. But I mean, in-arena hosts for this, especially when you paint the picture of it not being a red team per se, but I was hearing that it's like they picked up the state of Maine and dropped it into the Garden. The energy and the show up of fans there to support Maine and what the program has done. Describe that atmosphere for us.
Yeah, and that's why, I'm really leaning into the in-arena host side because you were working with a crowd that was so incredibly fired up to be there. And like I was talking about a couple weeks ago with you, I think, Maine was stopped short in the semifinals last year. So I knew coming to the Garden, that they wanted to prove something. And I think the whole state of Maine literally showed up. Ben Barr also mentioned that. He said, you look around and it felt like it was a home game because there were so many Maine fans there. Even the scene where the team did the red carpet walk up, there were just like over 500 people there easily. And I actually looked at some of the volunteers next to me and I said, it feels like it's going to be Maine's game tonight. As much as I would like to see UConn get their first title or Maine, whatever, I just feel like it's going to go Maine's way tonight. And you had to think that they were feeding off the crowd, just the energy, and they really showed up for their team. It just shows how much this program means to the state.
Absolutely. Well, energy is one perspective to explain all of this, but emotion is another one. You and I got to chat about it a little bit, but talk about just the emotion when this team collected. And plus, again, Ben Barr, just what he's done with this program in 4 years short time.
Yeah, no, it was so emotional. I was actually on the ice handing out the hats to the team as they were coming off the handshake line. And you look over at Ben Barr and he's got tears in his eyes. And, I shook his hand and congratulated him. I said, it's been a long time coming and I'm so happy for you. And he said, it sure has. And just happy to get the job done. And I think for the University of Maine, it's been a little bit of a ride because I think Ben Barr even mentioned a couple years ago, it might've been the season that COVID started. It was a 3-win team and then it's turned into a 7-win team. And then they were about a 500% team. And then it seemed like last year, the 2023-24 season, they really turned things around and stepped on the gas. So I think Ben Barr coming in and it was an emotional time for UMaine as well, losing Red Gendron in 2021. Ben Barr came in and, really had to work with this program and say, you know what, we're going to do things in honor of him. We're going to do things in honor of ourselves and the legacy that we want to leave. And I think this team did everything that they could to pave the path to such a success story. And it's hard not to be a UMaine fan now, I'll say that.
It's definitely hard. I mean, I told you how just watching everything, I had chills. So being there, I would have been equally as emotional. But the journey is not over. They get an opportunity to take on Penn State, a high offensive powered team. But we'll break down that and so much more when it comes to Hockey East and the Frozen Four tournament all coming at you. We'll see if Ben Barr and the established new culture over at Maine can continue to ride the high all the way to the end. Stay tuned with us here on the Hockey Hub.
Well, congrats to Maine and thanks to Casey and Natalie for joining our show. Brick, we're done, but I'm going to give you a final thought to wrap this podcast until the next one later this week.
Yeah, it's unfortunately, given the situation the Bruins are in right now, it's always uncomfortable to have to discuss these issues and the negativity and the bad vibe that seems to be surrounding this Bruins team right now. And it's just important to understand that we make our living, as does the players, around the greatest sport, the greatest game, and try to enjoy it. And I hope the players keep sight of that they have that pride and they understand the privilege of playing in the National Hockey League. And we feel the same way, the pride and privilege that we have in covering these guys and being part of it. And we have to talk about the obvious truths, as uncomfortable as they are. That's our job, but wouldn't trade it for anything, would you?
No, and I was just going to say, having been away, it's not lost on me and being back on the road, especially the camaraderie we have as our own teammates, broadcasters, and staff with the Boston Bruins staff. How lucky I am to do this job. How lucky we are to do this job. How special it is, and that's the beauty of the NHL. It's the parity. I love how competitive it is. I love how teams that are struggling can be great the next year. And teams that are great can struggle the next year, and that's cyclical and how it is, and it makes it all exciting about trades and et cetera, et cetera. So this is not the easiest slump that we've been through in the last 5 years, but it's still such a privilege to watch the product and broadcast this beautiful game of hockey. So well said. And also a privilege to enjoy the sun, which I'm about to go do, by the way, in California. So I'm tossing that one in there too. Lucky perks of the job. But Brick, always a pleasure talking to you. I love how your mind works. You've got such great insight. And we won't be on the next one. It'll be Adam hosting, but we'll see you guys soon in a future episode on the Hockey Hub podcast.